Hi class, this is your instructor Megan, and in this video I'm going to talk about email newsletter design. Now, I'm not going to revisit the design principles and elements all the way back from the beginning of class. I sort of assume that you know those and that you're going to implement them into your newsletter, your email newsletter design. So I'm not going to go over balance and harmony and all that stuff. You should have a really firm grasp on that by now, and just apply those elements the same way you did to your print newsletter to the email newsletters. Oh, I don't feel that I need to go over them. You will be judged on them, but I think you've had lots of time to consider them and think about how they are used in newsletter design. So what I want to do is just talk about what's new information. So what do you need to know for an email newsletter that you didn't need to know for your print newsletter? So in this lesson, I want to talk about email newsletter usability, which means that the purpose of a newsletter, the parts of a newsletter, and the modules of a newsletter. Now, usability is just a fancy word for how easy something is to use. So when we talk about email newsletter usability, and when you read about email newsletter usability, what you're reading about is how easily someone can understand the purpose of your newsletter and get information from it. So usability is just making things easy for people to use, and implementing the design principles is a big chunk of that. We're going to look at some specific email newsletter layout techniques that are going to help you make your newsletter very usable. So here's what you're making. You, for this project, are making an email newsletter for your client that demonstrates appropriateness to the personas, good layout techniques, good web writing and photo usage techniques, and a good representation of the mood and tone of your organization. So I should be able to hold your newsletter up to your website and your print newsletter and know that they're clearly from the same company even without reading anything. And here's how you're going to make it. You're going to use Mailchimp to create an email newsletter. So there's an additional video on how to get started with Mailchimp, but you will be using Mailchimp to create the newsletter. So this requires you to complete the readings this week, to sign up for Mailchimp, and to use the Mailchimp email template tool, which you'll learn about in another video. So let's talk about the newsletter process. This is the same as the print newsletter process. You want to determine the audience. Which persona is this for, persona or personas? What are their needs and problems? And how can your newsletter content deliver solutions to those needs and problems? So as you're in Mailchimp, you want to choose a template that delivers the content in the best way possible. So let's talk about newsletter types, the purpose of a newsletter. You're probably very familiar with email newsletters from coupons and sales announcements. You probably get a lot of email newsletters that are coupons or are announcing sales. David Berman Scott warns against this because he argues this is not an appropriate use of an email newsletter. You can announce coupons and sales anywhere. You don't want to junk up someone's inbox with coupons. He suggests that we use the newsletter to accomplish more than just announcing we have something to buy. So he's talking about incorporating thought leadership, just like you did in your blog and just like you did in your website and your print newsletter. So that's one type of newsletter, but Scott warns against it. Event announcements, again, it's nice. You may occasionally have an event announcement, but your newsletter should be published with some regularity, and you're not going to have an event every week or every month. So Scott suggests, and I'm suggesting, that you think about your newsletter in terms of news and helpful content for your user. So what news does your buyer want or need to know, and what content can you provide that's helpful? So view the email newsletter as an extension of your content strategy. That means coupons aren't going to cut it. Coupons aren't able to demonstrate thought leadership. Coupons aren't able to provide messaging from your core strategy. So view the email newsletter as an extension of your core strategy. Coupons really can't do that. So let's talk about the newsletter parts. For an online or email newsletter, you have some basic parts. You have the name and slogan, which is always, always at the top. You have navigation, and the navigation may go to your website. So here, this is the Trulia email newsletter, which is a real estate organization. And their navigation has find homes, get advice, and download apps. So these are links that go to their website. If you click find homes, it takes you to Trulia's web real estate listing site. If you click Get Advice, it takes you to their blog with advice on buying and selling houses. If you click Download Apps, it takes you to the iTunes store or the Android store, and you can download the Trulia app. So the navigation is not navigation within this page, but rather navigation to other helpful links. There's a date across the top. This is required. People can't, they want to know what issue this was, if it's new or old. And then we have headlines and action items throughout the body of the newsletter, which I'll talk about in a second, and the address or contact information down at the very bottom. So what you need to take from this slide is that the newsletter name and slogan goes at the top, the navigation and date go at the top, address and contact go at the bottom, and between those two things you have modules. So let's look at those modules. This is the same concept as modules you've seen in anything else we've talked about. These modules need to have a headline, a photo, or some kind of art if it's available, and then a blurb, and what's called an action item. So if you look at this module here, we have a headline, a photo, a blurb, and a button where you can see more about this blog post. So the button is the action item. And this is the largest module. So just like with your print newsletter, you want to have a feature module that's larger than the other ones. And then underneath it, they have some smaller modules. So here they have San Francisco listings and then New York listings. And each of those has a photo, a headline, a blurb, and an action item. Let's look at another example. This is an email newsletter from Be The Match, which is a bone marrow registry. Anyone can send in a spit sample to Be The Match, and they will test your DNA from your spit, put you on file, and if there's a person who needs a bone marrow transplant, you can be matched with that person and asked to donate bone marrow to them. So Be The Match, at the top we've got the newsletter name and slogan, we've got the date, and we've got navigation. And then at the bottom, which is getting cut off, you have an address and contact information. And then we have two modules in this email newsletter. The first module is the feature. It's the largest. It has the biggest headline. It has the biggest picture. It has the biggest blurb. And it has an action item, which is a blue link underneath. So what you need to take from this is that the action item has to be different. It has to be display copy that is somehow different from the body copy or the headline so people understand they can click on it. So what you want to do with these newsletters, in your print newsletter, you had to fit the whole article onto the page. With these email newsletters, you just want to tease the article and then create an action item that goes to the full article on your blog or website. Let's look at another example. This is Avery. Avery makes paper products and labels. Sounds really boring, huh? What kind of information would you want from them? Well, you don't want ads, right? You don't want Avery to just send you ads saying, buy our labels. Who cares? So what Avery is doing here is they're providing content as part of their content strategy. They have as a feature an article titled Make Your Meetings Memorable. Take an ordinary business conference or meeting and transform it into something unique by customizing your event materials. So these are tips. This is great. I actually care about these tips. I don't care about a coupon for labels, but I care about a tip about how to make my business meetings better. This is a great piece of content, perfect for the buyer. And it has a photo. Since this is the feature, the photo is the largest and the headline is the largest. And then we have a blurb and an action item. Instead of trying to teach me how to make memorable meetings in an email, they tease me, they give me a blurb that says what I'm going to learn, and then I click the action item to actually learn how to make my meetings memorable. Then you can see they have two other modules, teaching kids lessons that stick, with an action item that says learn more, and then a featured products section. And then of course at the bottom, we have more navigation and address or contact. Let's look at just one more example. Here's a Skillshare newsletter. Skillshare is a site where you can take classes from professionals. You go to Skillshare, you type in what you want to know, whether it's programming or design, whatever, and you can sign up for classes there. So at the top, they have the newsletter logo, and then they have a feature module, Teach Yourself to Code, 1 month Rails. Rails is programming language. They have the biggest picture, they have a blurb, and then they have an action item. So they don't actually tell me how to code. They have a blurb, and I can click the orange button to enroll now and learn how to code. And then underneath they just have a list of headlines. So look at how little content is here. There's almost no actual content. This is almost all headlines and blurbs and action items. People are looking at their email. They don't really want to sit and read something. So be very respectful of people's time when they're going through their email. Give them links, give them action items, but don't expect them to sit and read a lot. Then of course at the bottom we have navigation, and at the very bottom address or contact. So what you need to take from this as you design your email newsletter is that you need to continue using those modules, and then you need to make one feature module and other smaller modules that have just a small amount of type. You need to continue using hierarchy by having display type that's larger and body copy that's smaller. You need to continue using contrast with your color by making your action items stand out in color. You're just going to use all the design principles you have up your sleeve, but you're going to apply it to this concept of short blurbs and action items.